Apparently there's an issue because the first floor are having a big clear out and they've stolen bins from other areas. We're currently trying to find a spare bin, so there'll be an update later in the day on the bin situation. All right, Brigitte, I'll just hand over to you and we'll continue on.
Just two amendments to the general rules and procedures. One is just a technical thing. Map numbers weren't included in the appendix, and so the first amendment is just to add those map numbers in. And the second one is to show the full extent of the Stonehurst site as a scheduled activity. So the next slides, which I won't bother stopping on, is just the maps added on the right hand side, map numbers, and that's the map with the red outline in the middle right hand side showing the proper extent of Stonehurst. Moving on to natural hazards. So there's been an increase in the area covered by the floor level and fill management area to what was previously the flood management areas. And second, the other significant change is that matters of discretion for discretionary activities now include liquefaction susceptibility. So where an activity is a discretionary activity, then one of the assessment matters will be liquefaction susceptibility. Oops, that's right. Hazardous substances and contaminated land. The amendments there have been essentially to bring our standards in line with HASNO and the Land and Water Recovery Plan. And there are new objectives and policies which raise the issues of reverse sensitivity and how that relates to natural hazards and hazardous facilities.
Sorry, Andrew, can I just ask how they interrelate? So does your increased flooding vulnerability and all those other things now appear on your LIM, or how do people find out that that the property that they're buying or is affected by that on maps?
By the HASNO and the natural hazards. Sorry, we were talking about.
So any of those things.
Oh, right. Yes, they're all on the planning maps.
On the planning maps, are they on your LIM?
That's still to be determined, but it's highly likely that certainly the natural hazards will be, and hazardous contaminated land may be in the hail sites. Yes, in the hail sites.
On the hail sites map.
On the ECAN site.
On the ECAN site, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. So, I'm just increasingly concerned at the number of asbestos sites that are only now being kind of identified. So, in terms of contaminated land, have we got any kind of process to check? Because a lot of them don't actually need demolition consents. So, I don't know how they would get recorded as being on a hail site or having sort of bad stuff. So I'm just hearing a number of places in the central city, like the Odeon's the one that is most recent, that had asbestos there for quite a while. It's only now being identified.
Right. I understand, because it was discussed before when Mark Rushworth was still here at that time, and he said that there was a different process for that, and it was ECAN was also involved. It's a different method, but not with the district plan.
But my understanding for our district plan is that we provide the requirements for consents. So I would have thought if you're demolishing a building in the central city and there's a very good chance that it's got asbestos, that you should have a consent so that we can be notified and know what the work involved is around those contaminants or those hazardous materials.
Could I
At the
come back
moment,
to you,
we-
please,
we're
on that,
not.
councillor, because my understanding it is through the regional council, but I'd just like to clarify that before I give you a response.
Right.
And there was on the Building Act that I think they mentioned.
We'll come back to you with a fulsome response on that, perhaps next Wednesday.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. And the other thing that I'd really like to know is what requirements we have for people to do tests when they take on the land use. So probably the Metro Sports is a really good one. Again, that land was left in its state for a long time. And then when we went to put a car park in, someone found out it had asbestos. So I just don't quite understand the timing from when something's left to when it gets a use and what the process is to determine whether it's contaminated.
Well, I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, if we can get some information back on Wednesday, that'll be fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, moving on to natural and cultural heritage. The significant changes here. Avon River has been identified as a site of ecological significance and a significant landscape feature. It was a outstanding natural landscape, or is an outstanding natural landscape in the operative plan. There's some rules about clearance of indigenous vegetation in specific circumstances, unlikely to have a significant impact in most of the city. There's a new policy in terms of working with Ngāi Tahu to identify and assess sites of cultural significance. A change in terms of heritage items or heritage items and settings, and that whereas we previously had 4 different groups for such items, it's now being reduced to 2. The listings include 5 new items. The rules that apply to the rules apply now to items and settings. Previously there weren't that many settings. Yep.
I'll get Amanda Ose, our Heritage Advisor, to come and speak to that, if that's okay.
The 5 new ones in the central city. We've got 65 Cambridge Terrace, office and flat over by the river. There's a house at 23 to 25 Cashel Street. Yes, between, that's right, they own the property.
Yep.
The New City Hotel.
The New City Hotel.
By South City there.
South City. That's a heritage? Really?
It's listed by Heritage New Zealand, so we.
Right, so you're
we
required
were
to. Okay,
advised
yeah.
To look at that, and it met the threshold. The Coca Gallery at
Yep.
66 Gloucester Street, and a small office building in Montreal Street, 181 Montreal, which is the Williamson's Construction Company building. It's sort of across the road from South City on Montreal Street.
Montreal isn't a road across the road from South City. As you go and you're on Durham.
Oh, I'm a street over, sorry.
Yeah.
But it's that end.
Okay. And the class 1 and 2, as opposed to 4 classes, what does that, I appreciate that there's significantly fewer heritage buildings, but what does that mean effectively, a class 1 and 2, as opposed to 4 classes?
I might pick that up from a planning perspective, and then Amanda from the technical expert assessment. So the question was around group classification, moving from
So
4
you've got
groups.
4 to 2, yeah.
Yes. So previously the 4-group classification was based around levels of significance, ranging from national, international, based on a geographical level. So the technical assessment has informed ranking on a high significance and significance level. So all of those items have met a threshold for listing. They're significant to be listed in the plan. Amanda could take more questions on that. But in terms of the rules, what that means is they're all significant for listing. The rules are identical for Group 1 and Group 2, but that level of significance does come into play in the matters of discretion. So when a activity is assessed against those matters of discretion, regard could be given to whether it's a Group 1 or a Group 2 classification. Now there is in your package of information, and you'll come across this for Chapter 9, an individual statement of significance for each and every heritage item, so that will set out why it's significant.
Yeah.
Did you want to build on that, Amanda?
It really just, I think it simplifies the issue of what's listed and what's not and what's really important, because with 4 it was too finely grained. It was very difficult when you're writing an assessment to decide where you draw that line. And initially we looked at having 1 group because everything's significant to the city that meets the threshold. But we actually found, no, really there are items which are of high significance, particular importance to the sense of place for the community. They have high integrity, they're very original, intact.
And have we defined what's 1 and 2, or has Heritage New Zealand defined that?
We've defined that it's a separate methodology and criteria than Heritage New Zealand.
Could I just point out that we have a whole hour and a half to go over Chapter 9, Cultural and Natural Heritage. What we're doing at here is just looking at the amendments, just looking at what relates to the central city regards natural and cultural heritage. So you will have a lot of opportunity to ask a lot more background questions on that chapter in the afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Next slide.
Sorry, there's some handouts on this.
Can I just ask a question?
Yanni, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of the assessment that you've done for the central city, have you looked at buildings that weren't previously listed? Like you've got some that are up here that you're saying should be listed, but I just want to understand the methodology that you went through to look at the existing buildings post-earthquake and determine their heritage significance.
So we applied the same methodology across Central City as the rest of the city. We had a full amount of research on every building, site visits, photographic records, post-earthquake, and we ran those through our new methodology for assessments, which is 6 criteria and a number of thresholds for listing.
So basically what I'm interested in is, are there any buildings in the central city that you haven't had a chance to look at that could possibly be suggested as being worthy of a listing? Because we've lost so much in the earthquake, so now maybe buildings of a certain era become more important because we've lost, or buildings from it because we've lost so much.
Yes, due to our timeframes, we haven't been able to do a full and comprehensive study of all the buildings in the central city to assess them and research them. So that will be ongoing work.
That will be opportunity for a plan change post April 2016 to add more if the council agrees to that.
So one building that is an omission, which I think should be protected, and this came through in the resource consent that was granted to build a 22-metre apartment right next to it, was the art gallery. So have you thought about listing the art gallery because it has no protection and there's no rules around what can go next to it?
Is this a relevant question or not?
Well, is it included?
Individual buildings across the
No,
city.
this is asking.
Is the art gallery
I
included?
mean, I guess it's a question around the way that buildings were identified to be
That's right.
treated in this way and whether
That's
the gallery meets that treatment, and if not, why not?
The gallery is not included at the moment. As I said just moments ago, we will go through the methodology for how buildings were assessed both for Central City and for the rest of the city under Chapter 9 Cultural Heritage. There's nothing to say we can't add the gallery if for some reason it hasn't been assessed or assessed fully or is considered otherwise post April 16. It is too late for us to include new buildings in this now.
This has been, I've raised the art gallery at just about every briefing we've had on heritage for the last 5 years. So I just cannot understand why it's too late to consider it being listed. Like, we should be making that decision.
I didn't say it hasn't been considered.
It hasn't actually been researched yet.
Yeah.
Right, so
And
how
this
can
is
we
purely
get that
due
done?
to timeframes for
Yeah.
this project.
No, I understand
for this
that.
We
project.
can't do
I
that now within
understand.
the time frame that we have, because these particular chapters are coming to you for approval to go to the ministers in order to be notified within the time frames that we have. It takes time to do an assessment.
Also, maybe what we need is an ability to say, here's the buildings we think should be protected, and get the research done so that we can include it. Because, I mean, I'm just not happy that we seem to have no ability as elected councillors to have things considered that get protection from a heritage point of view.
So what we're hearing from staff is that can't be done within the time frame. Obviously, the point that Yanni's making is that he's very keen to have the art gallery put in there. Is there a way that we could do what Yanni's suggesting if we wanted to?
What we can try and do is look at having an assessment done so that it possibly could be incorporated within a council submission if the assessment comes out that it should be protected, and or that it be tabled through evidence when this chapter is heard. What I'm saying is, though, the assessment can't be done in time for this chapter to go to the ministers.
And we wouldn't want to be holding back the chapter in order to do that. So, I mean,
No.
in terms of the fastest that we can do what Yanni's asking for, the process that you've described is the fastest way to do that.
I would say the fastest way to do it was to initiate an assessment now, and if it comes out as positive that it should be protected, that's another issue, then this committee can submit it as part of a council submission on the stage when it's notified.
Great. So if we can have that work done as a result of
Yes, certainly.
that request, that would be great. Thank you.
With the cathedral, are we strengthening the protections for the cathedral in light of its heritage significance?
Well, from the planning provisions side of things, there has been a range of making some things more enabling and some things more onerous where it matters in terms of things having significant adverse effects or effects that are irreversible versus matters which is regular ongoing maintenance and make safe, for instance. With all of the heritage items, the activity status for demolition is non-complying. For heritage upgrade works, which would be seismic strengthening, it's controlled. And there's a range of repairs, maintenance work, which would be permitted with standards.
So basically in terms of our assessment of the cathedral?
So do you mean from a technical assessment in terms of how that's come
Or its
out of its
heritage
rating?
I think it came out as high significance, so that's a group 1.
Great. Thank you. All right. Keen to move this on if we can.
Okay, well, the next two bullet points that on the next slide, Caroline's just mentioned about the non-compliant status for demolition and controlled activity status for upgrades. So there's the existing requirement for a resource consent for sites adjoining a heritage item has been removed from the provisions. Heritage listing for the former Beaths Arthur Barnett's, the extent of that has been increased, so it's not just the facade but the whole building. And in terms of trees, the trees are protected either in a specific list, specifically identified in a list, if they're on private land. If it's on public land, then they're protected through general provisions.
impact on the development of the Cashel retail development?
So the Beaths Arthur Barnett, so just in terms of the location, just to confirm, is that the former current
Yes,
crossing
that's right.
building?
No, I know it very well, but it's also radically amended inside because we mucked around with it to put a school in it. It's got all sorts of things in it, but there's a major retail development going ahead there. Does this in any way create an impediment for that major retail development?
It would mean, I understand it would mean resource consent would be required for alterations.
Are there any
Interior,
alterations?
whereas previously it was only parts of the exterior. Currently, parts of the exterior.
That's just the exterior?
At the moment, parts of the
Parts of the exterior,
are
'cause-
listed.
But you're saying now, if you list the whole building,
Yeah.
you need resource consent to alter any of the internals, none of which are historic, by the way.
There is still interior heritage fabric remaining.
Some of it's copied too.
Yes.
Some of it's not real.
We did a careful assessment because there has been so much change, and so we did take that into account, but it's still stacked up.
So have you spoken to the owner of that development to ensure that this does not get in the way of a much needed retail development in the central city?
A bit more than that, there is actually a time frame on him completing some of the
various
activity there,
components.
and this resource consent could actually hinder that time frame being met.
You'll recall that early in the year we decided we needed to take, at the invite of the panel, to take 3 months out of the program, which meant there has been no public consultation with people on these matters. So they will find out about it. Obviously it's available online now publicly. It's going to the ministers. At the time that it's notified, there will be letters sent to directly affected parties, of which obviously this building owner will be one of these types of rules.
I think this potentially, that one, just sends out red light signals to me, just in relation to two possible contingencies, one which has to do with the council, not your division, and one which has to do with the completion of that development. And I'm wondering if we could maybe, I don't want to approve that without knowing the impact of it.
Yes, we're not approving anything today. We're coming back next Wednesday to do approvals, so we can go away and have a further
Okay.
look at that
And I'll just check
come
in the
back on
meantime.
Wednesday.
Yep, and if we can get some more detail on that, I think that would be good. I mean, I certainly share some of Vicky's concerns. We wouldn't want our planning rules to be holding up a development that's already well known to be planned within a relatively short time in the central city. But at the same time, if we are able to have planning provisions that protect the remaining heritage fabric of that building, I think that's something that a lot of us
So
would
we'll
support
find
as
out
well.
more about that.
So yeah, more information I think would be good so that we can make a confident decision on that one.
Thank you.
Two things. One is just help me understand the removed requirement for a resource consent on sites adjoining a heritage item, and two, whether there's been any consideration to group character area protection, like High Street, for example, recognition of special character zones, as opposed to individual buildings.
Okay, so on the first question, which was the consideration around that rule for adjoining a heritage site, so the consideration was given to that. So through the Central City Recovery Plan, a rule was introduced to for development on the site adjoining a heritage building to go through a resource consent process in terms of its relationship to a heritage building, and that was in that recovery context and looking at what the scale of development coming through would be. Looking at that rule in the context of the statement of expectations and needing to reduce consenting requirements, and also looking at the appropriateness of retaining the rule, the assessment has been that it's no longer considered necessary or appropriate to retain, especially in light of the statement of expectations. But there is something to note is that there are settings for heritage items, so they are predominantly within the land parcel. So there is still an element of control around a specific heritage building, but it's more likely to be the controls around that individual land parcel.
Don't need a consent. How does that get picked up?
So that wouldn't get nothing would get picked up through the heritage rules. And in terms of whether it's picked up through any other rules, I don't have that information to hand. That would be something that potentially through residential or commercial, if there were any design control type rules, but I understand that's been reviewed through previous
I just think this
considerations.
one I want to remove on Wednesday, but and then the character areas like High Street, can we give it a special protection?
And so in terms of character areas, that's something that I understand for outside the central city anyway, that's been looked at through the residential chapter. What we are proposing through chapter 13 and for chapter 9 is a proposed policy to do future work to look at heritage areas. No, that would be based around predominantly a Section 6 RMA matter, as historic heritage is a matter of importance, so differing to character areas. So there is quite a sort of sliding scale and some connection between those two matters, but this chapter is looking at from that very strong historic heritage angle. So that really, I think, would be future work if the council decided to do any future heritage area type work.
So in the context of Yanni's signalled amendment for Wednesday, if we can get information back on how that adjoining sites issue might be dealt with by other provisions, again, it means that we've got all the relevant information around that before we make a decision on it. So that would be good. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the